The rise of Africa shall be followed by the fall and disintegration of the United States. If they have been thinking that making predictions about other civilizations is the divine right of whites, then I'm here to dispel that myth. Once the African continent has risen, Europe's chaos will be magnified and America will disintegrate into pieces. Europe's disintegration is a manifestation of the dire problems brought about the gradual rejection of European ideas, the moderate economic growth in Africa and the rise of Asian economies. They still find it hard to believe, more like when George III of England ran mad after the loss of America as a colony. This time it is going to be worse and America will disintegrate into smaller countries. This is inevitable because the Europeans have been given so much opportunity and time but have failed to use it. They have instead taken the patience of other citizens of the world for granted and failed to make the world a better place for all humanity, even when they have had the greatest chance of all, since they have been able to make leaps in technology in a short period. But they have instead used this for greed, exploitation, murder, deceit, brainwashing, blackmail and other unspeakable evils. Africa's rise is surely inevitable, and this is shown in our resilience given to the fact that these Europeans have tried all means of exterminating the Africans from the global stage, just like they did in America, Australia, New Zealand. The recent 1967 to 1973 eviction from the Chagos Island of the Chagosians by the United Kingdom to make way for the United States to build a military base on the people's land. They took over large swathes of land regardless of humanity and the human rights they claim to champion. This has gone on in fact to date, even when they claim to be more enlightened, yet imposing universal beliefs, leaving no room for independent thought in all areas, economic, political, cultural and others. They don't recognize that there are more complex civilizations and cultures that have existed on Earth for millennia, and that their culture, in fact which borrowed most of its philosophy and practices from Africa, is just a drop in a barrel. When talking about human rights, how can you not talk about the prison industrial complex that is upstacked against the African humans in 51% American prisons, even though that particular group of us has only 12% of the total population? According to World Prison data, the United States has a prison population of 2.1 million, with 1.1 million of those being black. In fact, most of the blacks in prisons are victims of inherent political oppression and policies. Therefore these can only be termed as political prisoners, and yet we have a group of white men running around the world preaching the morality of European democracy when these same blacks didn't vote in the United States until the 1960s. Are these white people running around humans with brains or what? Compare that with the Chinese population and their prison numbers. America has a prison population of 2.1 million against a population of 320 million. That's 0.7% of the population, while China, with a population of 1.4 billion people, has a prison population of 1.6 million. That's a paltry 0.1%, and India, with a population of 1.3 billion, has a prison population of 410,000, making the percentage 0.03%. If China was so authoritarian as many have been made to believe, in imprisoning its people at the rate of the Europeans and Americans with their false claim to morality, China should be having a prison population of 9.8 million. There is no doubt there is more political tolerance and freedom in China than the Western countries, and this is another eye-opening disgust. Talking about the Chinese and their trade policies with Africa, I would not want to say the Chinese are the best thing to ever happen to Africa, but they are most assuredly the best thing that has happened to Africa in the last 30 years or so. To put this in perspective, even friends betray sometimes for selfish reasons, but the betrayal of the Western world and Europeans is one that is and should be unequivocally unforgivable in all human history. These people, whose sole aim has been to exploit, retard, murder, enslave, colonize, neo-colonize, brainwash and continually exterminate the Africans, have been on the African continent longer than enough to contribute from the theft of Africa's culture, knowledge, peoples, and resources. Their engagement with Africa started about 500 to 600 years ago, and they have been telling us that they are doing us grand good in all their claims and justifications, but when you closely examine the claims, you realize that this is far distant from the reality. How can you explain that they say they have been trading with Africa for 600 years and their trade stands at $60 billion, Europe and USA, yet there has been all kinds of justifications for these crimes, with these numbers and time spent in looking at the misery Africa has been in and is currently struggling with? It is good that we have seen the Chinese alternative and other alternatives that have opened our eyes. If you consider the $200 billion that the Chinese have traded with Africa in just 30 years, and putting that in perspective, the combined whites economy and trade with Africa should be around $4 trillion. This should be in addition to the infrastructure that the Chinese have littered all around Africa. It is unfortunate that when you move around the African continent you don't see any infrastructure that was built by the whites, Europe and America, that was not for the exploitation of African resources to their benefit but not trade. This is a very disgusting betrayal of a good gesture that has been extended to these people since their engagement with us Africans, and it is insane for anyone who has a slight interest of Africa at heart to accommodate them on the same scale they have been using on us, with the thought that their minds can be appealed to change somehow. This is a very rigid and dangerous group of people in power in Western capitals who think very little of Africa apart from as a garden where they are obliged to exploit for consumption, and we must put a stop to this. We must expose this inherent hypocrisy in this group of people on all ground. This is not to absolve Africa of its responsibility, Africa must listen to itself and negotiate better deals and must not listen to especially these eternal exploiters whose sole offer has been eternal lip service about what we already know, and we are continually struggling to teaching them while they are stealing away everything that belongs to us through deceit, intimidation, blackmail and other unspeakable tactics. Africa has the right to choose its trade partners, and that should not be a subject of any foreigners, whites, Americans, Europeans, or the Chinese. Africa should stand up and take its place, judge other people regardless of where they come from their historical contribution towards our sovereign, national, and human rights interest. To quote Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, Africa can only develop to the resistance and detriment of Europe and America, and we must be very determined to achieve this. It has never been a better time for Africa to rise to the occasion of its development and unity at any time in history. The time is now, and we must use it with the urgency of a blacksmith forging a knife out of hot iron. Ethiopia shall soon stretch forth her hand unto God. Africa must unite now. David Quayne Gonza. 4th July 2020.